Welcome back, everybody. So this video, I'm going to be talking about the 1901 Nobel Prize in Physics, which was won by this guy right here named Rontgen, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, and that's okay. That's not the point. So the point to my channel and these videos in particular is I like to try to help people exercise their brain. And brain is just a muscle like any other muscle in the body. If you don't exercise it, it decays. So we want to try to keep that brain kind of moving. But a lot of times we hear things like, oh, Nobel Prize winning this, Nobel Prize winning that. And sometimes, especially as somebody who is a scientist who hangs out with a lot of people who aren't, sometimes, I say things about, oh, this guy won the Nobel Prize for this or that or the other. People are like, great, but who cares, right? What does that Nobel Prize do for me? And almost overwhelmingly, all the prizes that are ever given out are given out for things that impact everybody's lives or broaden our base of knowledge, or both. I wanted to go through them kind of from the beginning and say, okay, let's look at all of them that have been given out, especially in physics, because I'm a physicist. I'm going to start there, then we'll go to chemistry and other stuff. But I wanted to go through them kind of one by one and just do a quick video of here's what the prize was about, that particular prize, and what it means to you. Mostly because when I was a kid, there was this show called Connections with James Burke. And what he would do is look at one invention and show you how it really impacts your life. But it's this invention you never think about. It's this invention you've just almost never heard of, but it really does impact your life every day. And without that invention, history would be different. So one of those inventions that is out there that without it, history would certainly be different, is the 1901 Nobel Prize in Physics. It was won by this gentleman on the screen. He won the Nobel Prize for discovering a type of ray that had never been discovered before, which led to X-rays. The X-rays you and I use at the dentist office and everywhere else was the subject of the 1901 Nobel Prize in Physics, which means it actually dates back to the 1800s, right? It goes back a long ways. And it was actually an experiment he did in 1895. Rontgen, who you can see right there, was discovering, the way the Nobel Prize Committee put it, discovery of the remarkable rays subsequently named after him. And for a while, they were known as Rontgen rays. Now they're known as X-rays. But he was studying different effects of what happens when you pass electricity through vacuum tube equipment. And you can see one of the vacuum tubes of the type he used on the screen. But he had equipment in his lab from Heinrich Hertz, Johann Hittorf, William Crookes, Nikola Tesla, Philippe von Leonard. I have misspelled that one. Von Leonard, not Vol Leonard. But he was kind of curious about what happens when you deal with different situations inside these, when you space those plates out more, when you put different gas inside, when you reconfigure it a little bit with different glass, different metals. How does it make things different? Um, so he was really studying those different things very carefully. And now a lot of people have heard his name outside the scientific community, but it's usually in a not so good case, right? So everybody may have heard it on the HBO series Chernobyl, which that's what was left of the Chernobyl facility at one point. It's been cleaned up a lot, but they were measuring radiation in Rontgens on the HBO show, and at the time they would have been using them in the facility. But it's a measure of measuring exposure for X-rays and gamma rays. It's sort of a legacy unit for that. Some people still use it. Some people use something else. But Rontgens are still seen around the world in science labs today. But most people, if you've heard his name at all, is probably from that show, and you don't have necessarily the best opinion of the guy after that. But he was X-rays, not nuclear stuff. Which is kind of interesting. So this was a very early piece of equipment. There are some sites on the internet that will say this was the first one. I could tell you, after having worked in a lab for years, that the first one never stays the first one very long. It kind of gets cleaned up and worked on and reworked and fixed, right? So this is probably something close to what the first one was, but not, I'm quite sure it's not the actual first one. That is, however, the picture you see right there is, however, the world's first X-ray. It was actually taken of his wife's hand, and you can see her wedding ring there. That's it. It's been preserved forever. That's the world's first X-ray. So you can see her bones inside there. She didn't have anything broken. They were just testing it out to see if it did what he thought it did. Now, he was doing this with vacuum tubes. These are sort of modern vacuum tubes, modern-ish, because vacuum tubes aren't really something we typically use a whole lot anymore. So these are what is sort of the modern equivalent of it, probably 70s, 80s, circa 1970s, 1980s. But basically what you do with a vacuum tube is you pass high voltage through a power supply into the tube. You generate, you heat some filament You generate electrons coming off of a cathode, and those things will hit a target, typically called an anode, and off of them will come some discharge. If you have the right target there, you will get X-rays. That's the way the certain vacuum tubes work. Other vacuum tubes do other things, but the ones we're talking about actually produce X-rays off of a tungsten target. Was the target he used. You can do it off of a bunch of stuff. He was using tungsten, so I'm going to focus off of that. But like any piece of technology, it has advanced over the years. So we went from that first one in the mid 1890s to 1906. You get equipment like this. It's actually being used by doctors to look inside people's chest to see what's going on. So it didn't take long for this lab discovery to kind of sneak out and started making application off in the real world. Although you can see this piece of lab equipment is pretty crazy looking, right? You've got all kinds of weird stuff all over. And just wouldn't be allowed in a lab today, or in a doctor's office today. This is sort of 1940s, with a little bit more advanced apparatus than you had in the early 1900s. Then, of course, today, all the X-rays are produced in that little tiny thing, that little white thing in the center of the screen. Everything else you see there is just for positioning of the patient and some controls. So, X-ray equipment has improved greatly over the years, down to the point where your dentist can kind of whip it around, grab it, stick it right at your head, and 2 seconds later have a X-ray of your mouth. So, come a long way since those first little pieces of equipment. Now, vacuum tube emissions come in all sorts of types. So you get these little plasma emissions. And the reason I'm telling you that is it becomes important in a second. But if you put a gas inside here and you put the right sort of vacuum apparatus in and the right sort of pass electrical discharge through there, you get these things you see in science museums. And those are plasma emissions that are very bright light. And they're not that far off from X-rays. So the way X-rays work, the other type you see is sort of the braking radiation, or what's known as Bremsstrahlung radiation, where you get these different energies out of them. But these are lower energies; these are higher energies as you go up. The higher the energy, the closer you are into the X-ray world, and closer you get to gamma rays. You're not going to get into gamma rays here, but if you use a tungsten, what you'll get is this huge peak, and you see this gargantuan peak comes because of the way these emissions are created. So you get those nice glowy discharges when you start to rip some electrons off of an atom. And this is an electron cloud diagram of a tungsten atom. And you start ripping electrons off, you get these nice plasma discharges, and it's kind of glowy, and you get neon lights, and you get those fun things at museums. When you start ripping those inner electrons off, what you start getting as they reattach or become less excited is the exchange of that radiation turns out to be an X-ray emission. So you get it excited enough, and this electron cloud can help you spit out X-rays. So it is a pretty cool little Nobel Prize that was won all those years ago. This guy was just in a lab working with his equipment, saying, "Hey, we got these cool glowy discharges. Hey, we got more powerful glowy discharges. Hey, we got an even more powerful glowy discharge, and now it's starting to go through things." Eventually, he wrote up a paper. He won the Nobel Prize. Next thing you know, we've got X-ray machines in labs. So this particular gentleman is the reason those prizes exist. And remember, Rontgen rays, when he first discovered them, there were X-rays. They were not generated in the nucleus where nuclear forces are generated. Those are gamma rays, neutron, alpha, gamma radiation. That all comes from the nucleus. These come from the electron cloud, so they're generated in a different space. And that's very important because X-rays are nowhere near as dangerous for the human body as gamma rays or all the other forms of radiation. It's sort of as a legacy discussion to say, hey, look, should he be the guy that we use as a measurement, or should it be Curie's, which is Madame Curie, which is a completely different video. But all X-rays, all generated in the electron cloud, none of it comes from the nucleus, which inherently makes it a lot easier to generate, which is why it's years in front of all the nuclear stuff. Nuclear stuff comes a couple of decades from this particular prize, and we will cover those later because a lot of those people did win Nobel Prizes for their work. But that's the first one, that guy right there. He did a bunch of science in his lab. At the time, people probably went, "Hey, what the heck is all this good for?" And he's like, "Well, shoot, I could take a picture of your hand and tell if anything's broken." Bingo, bango, we have X-ray machines all over. 1901 Nobel Prize. That guy right there, you have to thank for all the medical treatment that can go much quicker than it used to. Everybody have a great day. We'll do more of these as we go along. And eventually, hopefully, we'll try to get up to the more modern ones and do the ones in chemistry and other fields as well. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to learn more about these things. I will try to put these videos together and keep it as painless as I can and without as much math as possible. And if you have not seen the show Connections, it's over on YouTube. James Burke Connections, highly recommended. It is 1980s, early 80s PBS stuff, but fantastic if you get the chance to watch it. Everybody have a great night.